So straight into the webinar, I'm going to introduce Sue. So Sue Stockdale is the first British woman to ski to the magnetic North Pole. She is also a podcaster. Sue hosts this amazing podcast called Access to Inspiration, which I was listening to today. There's a nice little Raleigh special in there. You're a career coach, Sue. You're importantly a Raleigh alumni, and you're an author as well. You've recently, in the past couple of years, published a book called Explore a Life of Adventure. And this chronicles Sue's life through challenging beginnings, through her kind of exploration and adventures in some of the world's most challenging, shall we say, environments. So the North Pole, Antarctica, Greenland, chuck in 2 Raleigh expeditions in there, and you've got Sue Stockdale. So hi, Sue, how are you doing?
I'm good, Jacob. Nice to speak to you and nice to have everyone on the webinar tonight.
Brilliant. That was a bit of a long introduction, so we'll go straight in and let's set the scene, I guess. So can you set the scene for everyone about your beginnings? Did you have a particularly kind of adventurous childhood?
Well, yes, before I dive into answering your question, Jacob, I will just say if people put things in the chat, I am skilled, but I'm not that skilled to look at the chat at the same time. So I hope you can keep your eye on that for me, Jacob, and pick up on anything.
I will indeed, and we've already got one in there. Jeremy Fish, lovely. Sue is a national treasure. So, but I'll keep an eye on the chat. Don't you worry.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jeremy, and for that compliment as well. Well, yes, I did have a kind of interesting start up in life. And I guess the highlight, or one might call it the low light, is that as a teenager, when life was trundling along and you're looking to think about what's ahead in your life and your career, my mum sadly died unexpectedly. And I think that really brought me up short and made me realise that she was only in her 50s when she passed, that life can be short, and that maybe the way to make sure that no matter how long or short my life was going to be, I should live it to its full. And so I used to love reading adventure books, and maybe some of the people on the webinar have enjoyed the ones that I liked, which were Enid Blyton's Famous Five and Secret Seven series. And I think what Enid Blyton did for me was make an ordinary day out with your friends and a dog turn into an amazing adventure. So it captured my imagination. And so those two things was like, wow, life is short and I ought to have a lot of adventures. So that adventurous spirit was really the foundation of the next step of the journey, Jacob.
Oh, definitely. I do have a question for you about your first ever adventure. I know you went on a little cycling adventure with your friends up in Scotland. Can you just tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, well, it was my sister and another friend, and we had bicycles. I remember it had 3 gears, nothing modern at all. And we were leaving Edinburgh and cycling towards the Forth Road Bridge, if anybody knows that part of the world. So we're probably 10 miles out of Edinburgh, and we're planning to stay in youth hostels for 2 or 3 days. And we hadn't even reached the Forth Road Bridge, where I looked around on the pannier on the back, where I'd had the map. And given we didn't have mobile phones in those days or any other sort of form of communication, the map had blown off the top of the panniers, and we hadn't even sort of started on our trip. And I remember us all just thinking, oh well, we'll just have to follow the road signs, but we can't go back. We can't be seen to have failed. And as long as we rang in and told my dad and my friend told her parents every day that we were safe and well, that was enough.
Yeah.
And it was a great kind of adventurous spirit and way to kind of explore a little bit of Scotland on our own.
Indeed, it's quite the feat before the day of mobile phones, doing that. I honestly need Google Maps to get me to the shops, and I've lived in my area for about 2 years. It's tragic. But I just want to refer to this concept that you talk about, and it's the adventurous mindset. It seems like to me that's something that has developed throughout your life and is still like an ongoing process. I'm going to refer back and forth to this throughout this little webinar that we're doing. Are you able just to explain the adventurous mindset to everyone?
Yeah, well, I sort of tried to think about, well, what are the things that I bring to how I show up with all the different adventures that I've done. And then I've interviewed loads of other adventurers, explorers, people who are doing kind of interesting and unexpected things. And I found that there were a lot of themes. There were these 5 themes that seemed to stand out to me that were common amongst everybody. And you can see them here. Number 1, curiosity. So how do we bring that curiosity to a situation rather than immediately shutting down by saying, oh yeah, well, I can't raise the money, or that'll be too difficult, or it'll be cold, or something that kind of shuts down our thinking. How do we remain curious and open and think, well, let's just see what's possible? So that was the first one. The second one is about confidence and self-belief. And often I've not had confidence when I've started something out, and I've just said to myself, well, what's the worst that can happen? Let's just give it a go. Let's just give it a go, and if I'm taking the first step, I'll learn something. The third one is then about the tolerance of risk and uncertainty. And I kind of think these days we live in a little bit of a comfort bubble very often. Everything is so convenient for us. And there is a great benefit, I think, of risk taking. We grow, we learn new things. We are then able to better adapt when we do face uncertain and unexpected situations if we've practiced risk taking. And that's what I like to do every single day. I'll come back onto how I do that, but something I like to practice. The fourth one then is about, we can all talk about ideas. We maybe talk about going on a Raleigh expedition. How do we turn it into action? And again, it's making the big goal, the big ambition, taking it to the smallest step and saying, okay, I'll just look on the website, I'll make a phone call, I'll speak to somebody. Those are 3 things that are small actions that we can take to move forwards. And then when we do things, take an action, it often goes wrong. We get an unexpected situation. We can't get the money raised for an expedition or something. And how do you have that resilience and see a problem as a setback that's got a problem to solve rather than it being over or insurmountable? So put those 5 things together, and I think that by kind of focusing on those, we've got to give ourselves a better chance of being adventurous.
Yeah, I love the take home of it and how it's small steps that we can all kind of look to. And that's why I wanted to explain it now, because your story is, from my perception, all about kind of little steps, little accumulative steps, and that's how you take bigger risks. You get a higher tolerance for risk. Your self-belief grows, your confidence grows. And with that said, is it correct in saying that your Rally Expedition was your first kind of, apart from cycling in Scotland for 3 days, your first big adventure?
Yes, yeah. Um, this was 1988, as you can probably tell by some of the fashions that people are wearing there.
It's coming back in. It's coming back in.
This is Nairobi in Kenya, and this was my Raleigh expedition as a venturer. I'd had to raise over £1,500 to pay for my place there, so that was a big challenge in
Mm,
those days to raise that amount of money, and and then I didn't have any outdoor kit. I didn't own a pair of hiking boots or a rucksack prior to even doing. In those days, it was a selection weekend before going on an expedition, so I had to borrow them for the selection weekend, and then when I got through and knew I was going on a Raleigh expedition, I then had to go and find some money and then buy those pieces of equipment and so on. So getting to the start line, if you call being in Nairobi at the camp when everyone arrived, that was a start line for the expedition. That was an enormous achievement for me. And so I thought, I'm here, I'm going to make the most of this. And it's
yeah.
completely unknown for me, but like this is a big adventure.
Yeah, in Rally, we again we're on the same kind of thought as like small steps. We talk about 4 different challenges, and the challenge is getting over the post. In your day, like you had to do a selection weekend, which was not easy, and then you've got to raise the money, and then you've got to do the thing, do this expedition. In my case, 10 weeks, 3 different projects, and then there's the 4th challenge as well, which is coming home and carrying on the ethos of Rally, action at home, and carry on like adventure throughout your life. So, what specifically did you get up to with your first Rally expedition?
Well, we were there for 3 months. We had 1 month science projects, and we were in country. I was up in the north, in the Northern Frontier District, as it was known then. So, being out there with wildlife and not being there as a tourist, but living in country and seeing these things kind of wander past you, I just thought was amazing. So we did that for 1 month. And then I think there's some other pictures you've got as well. We did some community projects and some adventure projects. So um, I just learned masses. I mean, I'd never been trekking with a camel before. We were getting up at 4 in the morning to load up those camels in the dark so that as dawn broke at 6, we could start traveling. and we would travel all day until it got too hot, and then set up camp. And this is in like vast open landscapes where you see nobody all day, and you're learning about the country, about the nature around you from the camel, the herders, the local Samburu people. So that was eye-opening in itself. You know, the temperature's about 30 Celsius sometimes in the heat of the day. So, you know,
Yeah.
I'd never experienced anything like that. And then I think in the next picture you'll see our community project, one of them, where we didn't build this school, but we finished it off. The previous Raleigh expedition to us had begun to build this, and we had the kind of excitement of the handover ceremony back to the people there, the local people, and just knowing that they were going to use this and find it so valuable as a part of their community. You know, that it did make me have a really warm feeling to think that in a very small way I was making a bit of a difference in the world. And even at that 22 years old when I was there, I thought, wow, you know, there is something about when you give back and you give to others, you get so much more back yourself. And I think that really speaks to the fourth challenge that you mentioned.
Yeah, definitely. The idea of like helping yourself by helping others is something that Rally's all about. But I want to ask, like, what type of impact did the whole experience have in your life? If I'm right, you were just working a corporate job, and then all of a sudden you were on this amazing adventure. What kind of impact did that have on you when you came back?
Yeah, well, I was working in the finance function in a corporate, and I had never really thought about what my career was or even what I liked doing. And then all of a sudden, after this expedition, I said to myself, wow, I could do loads more than I ever imagined was possible. And do you know what? Finance is not really my thing. I think I like this idea of personal development, and I've learned a little bit about it on the Raleigh expedition. And back in the company where I worked, there was the training centre where all the training happened in the company was in this lovely old manor house. I was in a sort of 1970s corporate building where I was working, and there was a lovely manor house across the road where everybody used to go for the training courses. And I said to myself, wow, I just love to work there. So after the Raleigh expedition, I came back and we had a sort of a meeting back with the bosses, the powers that be that had arranged the Raleigh, our time off for Raleigh. And I remember him saying to me, so now, Sue, what do you want to do? And I said, I really want to work in training and development. I want to work in that building over there. And he sort of, you know, grimaced. And he probably got a sense of that passion that I had to really go and almost give back within the company and to do more. And I said, you know, the company's invested in me. It's and allowed me to have time off here. Surely you want to maximize now my enthusiasm. And in those days, you know, credit to my boss. Somehow, some way, a job opportunity opened up in this training center, and they said, would you be interested? But you have to make a commitment for 2 years, and it's going to be doing IT training. My eyes rolled. Oh, God, boring IT training. And you know, I'm ever so glad I did that, because I was at the forefront of teaching people about how to use email and, you know, Excel and today what we just know as normal functions in a computer. I was there learning about that and training other people in it, and it was so useful. And I
Yeah,
really enjoyed it in the end.
yeah. Kudos for your boss for like valuing the experience as a whole to let you go off for 3 months to do such an experience. I think that's I don't know, that takes a really good like foresight in as a boss to understand that experiential learning outside of the workplace or a book is really important. So that's quite rare, I think, as well. Um, I know you came back and you started to then go down this route of career development and coaching, which is kind of the staple of what you do now. I know you also had an involvement with Venture Scotland. Can you just tell us a bit about what that is, and what did you do?
Well, you mentioned a moment ago, Jacob, this fourth challenge. You know, how do we give back? How do we do something back in our local communities once we've come back from our expedition? And there was a whole bunch of us in Scotland who had been on different expeditions, not just in Kenya. And there was a kind of informal group. You know, we would get together occasionally down the pub and sort of think like, what could we do here in Scotland? And one of the guys found this bothy that you can see in the slide here, this old stone-built cottage. It's near Glencoe in the middle of nowhere in Scotland. And he said, how about if we could use that to have like almost rally equivalent experiences for young people from inner city areas in Scotland, and we take them there and we do climbing and canoeing and we do conservation work. And rather than building a school in Kenya, how about doing something locally here in Scotland to help to inspire them? And everyone, all of us had enthusiasm, and he managed to get the landowner to agree. And out of that, it happened, and we started to have these weekends, and eventually that morphed into becoming a charity, Venture Scotland. And here we are now, 35, 36 years later. And that charity is still going on, and thousands of young people who never had hope, didn't have prospects, have been through that experience. And that all became because of Raleigh, that became the catalyst for people to want to do something back in Scotland. So, I'm hugely proud of being there at the start when that all began.
Yeah, it really is something to be proud of. Like, it's an amazing thing. And I'm someone who, I grew up in a single parent household with just my mum, in a town, in the middle of a town. My mum couldn't drive, and I couldn't access nature. And I think that's something really valuable for young people in particular, is accessing nature. On a different note, I know after this period of time, you decided to work in a war zone for a year. You worked in the former Yugoslavia for a year. And just watching the news, seeing the war in Ukraine, seeing the things happening in Gaza, I think, yeah, that's pretty brave, pretty radical thing to do. Can you just tell us a bit about why you did it, what you did?
Yeah, well, it is a bit challenging. I think back to that adventurous mindset slide. Think about the confidence and self-belief and the risk taking. And I'd got to a place in the corporate job I was in where I didn't really see. I'd progressed really fast through the company, but I kind of thought that there is more to life than just what I'm doing here. I want something even more adventurous. And I happened to spot an advert in the newspaper. It ended up being a job that was working with the UN in the former Yugoslavia. And before I knew where I was, I'd been offered the job. It was a quality assurance job. So I wasn't giving humanitarian assistance. I was kind of going to be in the head office, which was in Zagreb in Croatia. And so I remember thinking like, well, I could do this kind of in my head, this corporate type job, but it just happens to be in a war zone, and it's with the United Nations. And wasn't the Morale experience a bit like the United Nations? We had people from all over the world, that on this expedition. So this is going to be like a kind of, expedition equivalent of people that are all brought there together to try and make a difference in the former Yugoslavia, which was 1994. There was a civil war on there in that part of the world. And then everybody else said, "Are you not crazy? Why are you going to leave all this comfortable corporate lifestyle and a pension and a car and all that sort of stuff? Why do you want to go into work in a war zone?" And my head said, "No, this is not sensible." And the kind of logic said, "No, it's not sensible." And then my intuition, when I listened to my intuition, it said, "This is too big an opportunity to turn down, Sue. Take a risk. What's the worst that can happen?" That's what I said to myself. What's the worst that can happen? Well, I could get killed. Okay, I could get killed walking in front of a bus, or with some accident here. So take the risk and see what happens. And it was that kind of life's too short, perhaps maybe thinking about my mother and
Yeah.
what I would regret it later. And so I took the risk and I went there, and it was a huge learning experience. There's a lot of things were not as I imagined them to be. It was quite frustrating in the actual job I was doing. We didn't make that much progress. But when I
Mm.
looked around and saw what we were trying to achieve as the United Nations there, trying to help people's lives in a war zone, I did think it was worthwhile seeing that. And probably the biggest thing I learned was about risk taking. Take a risk, step into the unknown, see what happens, and when it works, I had so much more confidence. And even though I came back 1 year later to no job in the UK, I felt fine about that. I wasn't worried about it.
Yeah. That so obviously there's your ability to take risks, and your tolerance to risk, was perhaps higher than the people around you, the people that loved you and love you. So how did you deal with the naysayers, I suppose, people who were kind of questioning the risk you were taking? How did you deal with that?
Well, I think what I've found is people who are naysayers, it's only often because they love you or are concerned for you.
Yeah.
So I kind of thought, that's and their view of the world and how they attribute risk is not the same as me, and that's fine. So we don't all have to be the same. So first of all, I thought these people are trying to do the best from why they're saying don't go, but also they don't live my life. And if I'm sitting in my, whatever it is, comfortable chair when I'm whatever age of life, and I look back and I don't want to have regrets. And the only person that's going to stop me having regrets is me. So I'm the
Yeah.
one that has to make the choice to say it's my life. And maybe out of the risks I take and the things I do, maybe that in of itself will be inspiring to others. And there was
Yeah.
kind of an inkling at this point that, how I do, what I do, that behavior has an influence on people around me. And rather than them hold me back from that, why don't I actually just challenge myself in a different way?
Excellent. That's a really good answer. My next question was, I'll ask it anyway, but I think I know the answer. At this time, did you feel, or how did you deal with the pressure to stay in your job, to maybe settle down, buy a house, things like that, or was it never even a question?
I think there was a question, and I think what I reflect on is it's very easy to follow along on somebody else's map of life,
Mm.
of what a career ought to look like, what a, we the traditional way, of course, isn't it? Grow up, married, get a job, probably have kids or whatever it might be. Or that was the old way of thinking of a life, and being a job for 30 years. That
Yeah,
way back when, that was kind of like the old way of looking at life. And that's fine for some people, but it's not fine for everybody. So first of all is like just taking a moment to think about that. If we're in habitual mode, we're not thinking, we're just following along, and it can take time. Sometimes we're all so busy like that with our these days with our heads in our phone, we don't
yeah.
actually say like, let's just stop, get away from that, and think for ourselves, is this really what I want? And we didn't have phones in the days we're talking about here, but I think a metaphorical equivalent is like, work out what's right for me. And then I have this kind of blind confidence about like, oh, I'll be fine. What's the worst that can happen? And just blind naivety sometimes is very, very helpful to just take you forwards and not think about the consequences.
There we go, guys. Blind naivety. Hit it here first. No, but I do agree with you about, especially with the dawn of social media. So I'm 25 now, and my perception of, yeah, success is completely skewed by what I see on Instagram, and yeah, it's not particularly healthy. It's not why at Raleigh now, in fact, that venturers aren't allowed their phones on project site, which I think is an innately positive thing. But I wanted to ask you a question. I was thinking about it today, and it goes like this: like, would you say you're pushed or are you pulled? And by that I mean, have you been driven or dragged? And by dragged I mean, I know you were adopted as a young child, and then your mother died when you were 14. And that's quite a challenging set of circumstances to come into. So to what extent has that dragged you to seek out all of these adventures, or are you driven? What's the balance there?
Great question, Jacob. And I'm not sure these days I even know the answer to that question completely. I mean, I think that definitely, yes, my upbringing and circumstances compel me to, you know, want to fill my life with being purposeful in it's kind of like a fast track to doing things to experience life, and that is probably as a result of my early circumstances in life. But as we'll probably get onto if you've got time in this story, and I hope those that are listening and watching or have not fallen asleep yet, I hope you're enjoying what I have to say here, is that the more and more I get pulled towards something bigger than myself. And I think Raleigh really helped to start that, is to see that we I could be quite wrapped up in what I'm doing, but actually there's a much more um, uh, bigger mission in the world that I was kind of, sounds a bit corny, everyone, but that I believe I was kind of put here to do something bigger than that. And I don't ask me how I came to that sort of thought or when it hit me, but I realized like I'm here for a purpose. So follow that. And it's about kind of giving back and having a bigger mission than just me.
Absolutely. And the thing that I guess you're known for is this Arctic expedition that you went on. So can you tell us a bit about it? And I guess I want to get at, I know you got the leaflet through and the question on the leaflet. Can you talk about that, please?
Yes, and I saw a chat thing come through as well, so I don't know if there's another question I need to
Yeah,
answer there.
yeah,
Okay,
there is. I'll get to it at the end then.
that's fine. So yeah, I was back in the UK now, back from the UN. I didn't have a full-time job. And there I was thinking, like, what do I do next? And I like reading the newspaper. So in the newspaper on this particular day, I saw an advert that said wanted 10 novice Arctic explorers. And you had to send off for details. I thought, oh, that sounds really interesting. And there were two qualifications, the ability to work in a team. Tick, I knew I could that from Raleigh. And second qualification, the ability to raise £15,000 to pay for your place. No idea how
Wow.
to do that. 10 times as much as what I'd paid for Raleigh. But I said, if it's meant to be, it will happen. I'll find a way. What's the worst that can happen? I'll take that first small step and I'll send off for information. Nothing can go wrong there. The information comes back, and on the front it says, are you man enough for the ultimate challenge? And the brochure was all pictures of men. Now, that was like a red rag to a bull for me. And it wasn't just that reason that compelled me to apply, but it kind of incensed me. Like, well, why can't I go on an expedition like that? And maybe that wasn't the organizer's intention, and I know now it wasn't, but they just didn't think about it. And it made me then even more kind of determined to get a place on the team. I ended up, out of the 10 novices that they were looking for, 8 were men and 2 of us were women, myself and a Swedish woman. And yeah, here you can see on the picture us starting off on our first few days of our expedition, heading into the unknown.
Yeah,
350 miles later, we get to the North Pole.
it's absolutely incredible. And the thing that makes me laugh is that it's literally like living in your freezer. And the way that you managed to raise the money was a sponsorship with Bird's Eye, is that correct?
Yes, yes.
Literally a fish finger. And I think that's brilliant. So can you tell us a bit about the 10 people you were with? Did you get on with them? Were there conflicts? What was it like?
Yes, I will tell you about the 10 people. If I might just also add in something that was
Yeah.
kind of relevant, was that to get the Bird's Eye sponsorship, I had
Mm.
to write a letter to, and when I got to meet them initially, and I had loads of people saying no, they didn't want to sponsor me or didn't even bother replying. This one conversation, I went off to meet the Bird's Eye person, and the first thing she said to me was, "Oh, I see on your letter you've been on a Raleigh expedition. I've just come back from blah blah blah, wherever she'd been."
No.
And it was the Raleigh connection that kind of forged that conversation. So it was great. It's a great door opener, and kind of finding that common connection. Anyway, here are the people in our expedition, the 10 of us plus the some of the other support team around us, and that came into the pole when we got there. Yeah, there was I was the youngest, 29 at the time. The oldest was 46. There was an office worker, there was a doctor, a lawyer, there was somebody who was in the police force. I mean, there were a whole varied backgrounds of people, but everybody had this commitment to explore the unknown and to challenge themselves. And in that selection process that everyone had gone through, from 500 applicants to 10,
Mm.
the one thing that the organisers were looking for was team working. So not great individuals, but great team players. And I think that, for me, that really had reminded me of that Raleigh experience, where you really learn to work as part of a team, doing something productive.
Definitely, definitely. I listened to another interview that you've done in the past, and you talked about um to some extent like male egos in different expeditions you've done, and then you did one exercise with this specific group, and it was writing what if lists. So, what if we come against a polar bear, or what if we fall down a crevasse? And I was inspired by you. I did a what if list as well. I run a business with my partner, and we did a what if list because we're not very good at communicating what we're kind of worried about, because you don't want to talk about that. But where I'm going with this is, do you have any kind of nuggets of wisdom for a diverse group of people coming together? How do you work past your fears in that scenario?
Well, I think first of all, it's finding a way to acknowledge that everyone has fears. So the what if list is a great
Yeah.
practical way to do that. So and then it, there's one thing about acknowledge the fear, and if it's a what if list, we get it written down. And then once you can actually stare it in the face and say, this is what I'm afraid of, well, all of a sudden the fear that perhaps started at this size diminishes to this size, because what makes something fearful for us is our imagination. Our ability to imagine the worst, to catastrophize, to think, oh my goodness, what could happen? That is what we're really frightened of. When we look at the fear in reality, often it's not anything that's too scary after all. And when we get out of our emotional brain, the bit of our kind of amygdala that triggers the fear in us, when we are able to calm that down, we get into what is the kind of frontal part of our brain, the executive brain, and we can actually do quality thinking, and then we can problem solve. Okay,
Yeah.
right. Well, what is that? What is that this actual fear that we're naming here, and what are the different ways that we could solve it?
Oh, that's excellent. Yeah, that's really good advice. Instead of ruminating on the things you're worried about, get them out, and then
Yeah,
you can problem solve. That goes
yeah,
back to the adventurous mindset, I guess, is that they're just problems to be solved, aren't they? Your fears.
yeah.
So what was your biggest personal challenge for doing this amazing expedition? What was the hardest thing that you encountered?
The relentless physical and emotional pressure. So dragging a sledge weighing the weight of an average person for a month at a time.
Mm.
We stopped overnight and camped, but you're dragging that day in, day out. It is getting eventually lighter because you're eating your food that's weighing it down and so on. You're using up your fuel, but you're dragging a sledge, physical exercise every single day. There is the kind of mental pressure because there is nothing to look at or focus on. As you can see on the
Yeah.
slide here, it's white all around you. And often you're skiing single file. It's too cold to speak to anybody else, and it's easier to ski in somebody else's ski tracks. So it's kind of like being on a mindfulness mission for a month. So imagine if you had to be around your friends, but you weren't actually speaking to them and you had to do something really challenging, even for 8 hours a day. What goes on in your head has such an impact or influence on how you actually do the thing. Because the
Mm.
minute you start saying, "Oh, I'm cold, I'm tired. Oh, this is a bit difficult. Oh, my leg's sore. Oh, I don't think I can do it." All of that begins to then magnify. I was talking about our fears. So being able to manage that, being able to kind of go like, "Oh, well, okay, yeah, we're only on our first hour, but that's 1 hour of 8. So let's just get through this first hour. Oh, I can't get through an hour. Well, let's get through 5 minutes then. But always think about what could be done to move forwards. Because, think about the word motivation.
Mm.
It's a motive for action. So find your motive for action.
Mm.
So when we encounter all these mind games that, we all have, how can you find a motive that will say, right, despite, I don't know, what would happen if I switch off my phone and I can't have access to Facebook? Oh, okay. Well, maybe there'll be something new I will learn from that. Maybe I'll enjoy the silence. Find the motive for taking the challenging action.
Yeah, that the painting the picture there of it's just all white all around you is something that I never really thought about. There's literally nothing to look at, and that's really challenging. Was there a point where you wanted to give up? Was that ever an option?
Well, there was quite a number of occasions, yes, where I did feel that I probably couldn't go on. But when there
Mm.
is no option to give up, there is not often not an ability of a plane to come in and land where you are. The practicality is like, so you have to just say, well, actually, I can't get picked up. And the
Mm.
only way to get out of here is for me to carry on. And so maybe there's a bit of how do we take that approach when we're not in the North Pole into just our normal lives and say, okay, there is no get out clause here. I'm on an expedition or I'm fundraising or whatever I'm doing. I'm just going to take the next small step and see what happens.
Yeah,
And I'm not going
excellent.
to judge it. I'm going to be curious just to say like, well, I wonder what'll happen when I do that.
Yeah, almost like pure experimentation. Just yeah,
Yeah.
what will happen? So a lot of the people in this webinar today are in fact alumni or potential like venture managers, we call them in Raleigh, the 25-year-old plus or project leaders. So this might be a little bit cheeky, but I wanted to ask you, as you are getting older, how do you still bring adventure into your life?
Because I bring that adventurous mindset that I talked about. I
Okay.
bring curiosity to looking out my window in the house and going like, oh, look at that robin there out in the garden. Or and the way I talked about risk taking and sort of not being too comfortable is, this might sound random, people. Every day I have something different for breakfast. So I don't get up and have cereal and toast every day. I don't get up and have a smoothie or whatever it is. I wake up every morning and I say to myself, oh, I wonder what I have for breakfast today. And then I decide on what I think would be nice. And then I tell my husband, and he says, oh, is that what we're having? Right, okay. And you know, I think he'd probably have cereal and toast every day. But the reason I kind of do that is because it's my little reminder to myself, my little habit of being uncomfortable, of not just accepting what was yesterday has to be the same tomorrow.
Mm.
And using the little breakfast thing to say every day can be different. And that's an adventure. Like, what's going to be tomorrow's breakfast? It's going to be an adventure.
I love that. I love that so much. My next question, in fact, was like with like Ross Cook running the length of Africa, you doing this amazing Antarctic expedition. It's not always maybe like accessible for people. We can't all are in a different stage of our life now where we can kind of go off for a couple of months and do things like that. So yeah, how do you bring adventure into every day and trying different things, mixing it up? What about challenges? Do you ever do certain challenges?
Well, yes. I mean, the podcast I talked to, you know, you introduced the Access to Inspiration podcast.
Mm.
That we started that in 2020, and and my that was a challenge. Like, I wonder if it's possible to find a way to share these inspirational stories that I have heard over many years from people, and I know other people will have inspirational stories. How can I do that? I don't know anything about podcasting. Well, I'll just learn. Well, what's the worst that could happen? Nobody listens. Well, you know, if that happens, well, so be it. We've learned something. We've tried it out, and that was the way I brought it. I brought it as a challenge, as an adventure to just experiment and see what happens.
Excellent. Yeah. I love the experimental mindset and I'm trying to embrace it a little bit more. I was telling Sue before we admitted everyone, I'm swimming every day in the sea in June and I thought it'd be lovely and nice and warm, but it's actually horrible here in the UK. But we've got a few questions. So if you guys have more questions, put them in now. I just want to say one thing before we do get to those questions. And I wanted to shout out Raleigh's alumni. The Ruckus Alumni Society is how this webinar happened in the first place, hopefully the first of many webinars. Most or a lot of the people in this call are alumni, and you're all really massive assets to Raleigh. Like I always say to people that the people who've done Raleigh are the best representations of a Raleigh expedition. And with that in mind, I guess I want to challenge you or encourage you to have your own little adventure by talking about Raleigh, reminiscing, get those photos out, tell someone who you've never told before about your Raleigh expedition because it's a really valuable thing to talk about. Hopefully, you can inspire someone. If you know someone, for example, they're in a corporate job and they're a bit down in the dumps and they're looking for a change, tell them about your experience. Or you know someone who's 18, they're going through their A levels, they're all stressed and they don't know what to do next. Speak to them. If you're not an alumni and you're looking for inspiration, I would say thank you for coming. I hope you've been inspired. We have plenty of guides. We've got a wonderful newsletter. Sue's Access to Inspiration podcast is actually brilliant. So do give it a listen. So, questions. We've got a question about this photo here, Sue. So Anna is watching with her 12-year-old nephew. Hello. And he wonders if you left the Great British flag at the North Pole.
Well, it would have been a nice thing to do, but we didn't, because like all of us that go into rare places are told about, is take only photographs and leave only footprints. So nothing was left there, and we brought back everything with us.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, that's a really nice answer. Helen asks, if you were to give one piece of advice on using what you've learned to give back, what would it be?
One piece of advice of using what I'd learned to give back. Is that, sorry, I was
Yeah,
coughing at the time.
what would it be?
If any of us follow our passions and do whatever it is that we're really interested in, if we bring that passion and energy to something, it will rub off on others. So to give back in a way that you're going to enjoy doing, that there will be a ripple effect from that in some way, shape, or form that you might not even imagine.
That's brilliant. That is excellent. Oh, Jeremy's put a link to the idea of micro adventures, which is the idea of kind of going away on the weekend, for example, and making the most of that, I believe. For example, I'm from Pembrokeshire, West Wales originally, and I've never walked the coastal path, but I'm gonna do it in little weekend chunks over the summer. So,
That sounds brilliant.
here we go. And Jeremy has also put a link in the chat. If you are an alumni and you're not in the Raleigh UK Society Facebook group, there's a link in the chat as well. And everyone should get an email after this. And if you're, depends what stage you are, if you're an alumni, you're a volunteer manager or a prospective volunteer, you'll get different information. But if you are an alumni, you'll get that link to the Facebook group. So Graham, thanks for relighting my Raleigh flame. Been recalling tough times and adversity on trek in Borneo. Defo used the mantra push forward. Being a great 45-minute will definitely tell my rally story to those who I feel need an adventure. Thank you, Graham. Awesome. Thank
Brilliant.
you so much, Graham. Um, with that, then we will wrap up. Sue, thank you so much for your time. I'm 25. I'm at like a crossroads in my life, and I've been truly inspired by your mindset. So thank you so much for that. So yeah, thank you everyone for joining. You'll get the recording and have a lovely evening. Thank you all so much.
Thank you. Bye.